where'd he come from? Well, he came from Upper Greece, Macedon. That is that northern part of Greece. There's a state now of Macedon on the Greek side. There's also a Macedonia on the north side of the former Yugoslav border. So at this moment, Greece was still in balance among the different states. Athens, Corinth, Thebes, and the smaller states. So there were multiple states in Greece in the year 400 or 500. But as you see when we look at this map, right away Macedon has taken over most of the north and down to a large section to about halfway down the peninsula. So what had happened? Well, the city-states had destroyed each other. The city-states had fought a civil war among the Greeks down to the year 400. And so by 390, they had essentially destroyed the power of all their states, and they continued to be divided, so that out of this confusion, out of Greek civil war, emerged one state, that northern state, Macedon, with a king, not a democracy, but a monarchy, to build what is the first large unified state on the European continent. This is the first big one. It's before Rome has become big. So this is before Rome, before the Rome of Caesar and Cicero. And so this is the first large territorial state with a centralized political and military hierarchy on the continent of Europe. And later political entities will look back at this and study Philip, Alexander's father, and study Macedon and try to come to understand what exactly it was that he had achieved. So this is the transition then from the city-state, from the Greece of the city-states, the Parthenon, Pericles, Sophocles, to the age in which a big Greek state takes over, and that's Macedon. Here's the look of Macedon, which are mountains, interior valleys. It's a land-based culture. It's not sea-based, so it's a big change in that way. And, of course, it is the creation of Philip, King Philip II of Macedon. King Philip, king of Macedon, who is the genius who brings this all together. You can see his dates are 382 to 336. 382 to 336. So early 4th century, way up in the 380s, almost 390. And it's his work that brings this together. So how did he do it? What was it that was unique about him and his state? It was the military. It was his insight into the nature of the military and his insight into the fact that Greek armies were badly organized, badly trained, and so what he does is set up the first permanent army. These are not citizen soldiers. These are professional soldiers. He will pay them. Now, they're Greeks or Macedonians, but they are paid soldiers, so they're going to be trained, and they're going to be able to do things that previous armies couldn't do, because these armies are going to be well-trained, well-prepared. And in the evolution of his idea, he created the Phalanx. He made it. He created it. He learned it from another military expert, but he was the person who, as the king of Macedon, could put it into effect. And you can see it on the screen right now. It was, of course, a military revolution, because it was not anymore the idea of units racing through in chariots or anything like this, but this was a very well-organized, very unified, very well-trained military unit that worked together and cooperated and trained all the time. That's the key. Trained all the time. And therefore, through training, perfected the way you can see it right on the screen. 8 or 10 across. Everyone carried the sarissa, this very long, like about 18-foot spear. And as they moved, it was like a tank. It was like a human tank. And the sarissa went out in front. It extended, of course, 12, 13 feet beyond the first person. And as they pushed aside, the next person would come through with the next and the next and the next. And as they move forward, then there's another phalanx coming right behind them. And so no one could stop them because no one else had figured out what Philip had done. And so from the very beginning, Macedon rose up on the debris of less well-organized, somewhat chaotic states, somewhat chaotic military states. And so that's the beginning of everything. And by the time Alexander's born, the army of Macedon is already the superior army in the world. Remember now, Rome isn't really a threat on the scene yet. It's there, and it's growing, but it's local. It's limited to Italy. And so this is an international power. Now, when we talk about Philip, and we talk about Macedon, and we talk about Greece in the 390s and 380s and 370s, what about that earlier period that we've talked about on our previous nights? Well, of course, everybody here can know immediately that the army is completely changed, right? The army of the Bronze Age charioteers are individualists who are racing across the terrain in their chariots and pretty much on their own. Here we have a very, very brilliantly organized, precise military unit. In other words, completely changed. So you'd think that maybe it controverted the stories of the Bronze Age charioteers, but of course nobody thought that. They treasured the stories of the Bronze Age charioteers. They treasured the great stories of the Age of Heroes. And so in the age of Philip and Alexander, they're still reading the stories of Agamemnon. They're still loving the stories of Agamemnon. They're pretending that they're connected to the age of Agamemnon. They're telling the stories and reading the stories together, but of course they're completely changed. Now, Homer is the number one most beloved book in Greece, the Greece of Alexander, and he carried his copy of the Iliad with him at all times. He had his copy of Iliad under his pillow. He would sleep with it under his pillow. It was the copy that Aristotle had given him with a little inscription and a few little notations. So, of course, the world of Alexander and Philip is completely different than the world of Achilles, but the world of Alexander still loves the world of Achilles and still idolizes and admires. And so these two worlds come together psychologically and poetically in the minds of these people. So King Philip of Macedon, what about him? A tough guy, a very, very brilliant organizer, a very egomaniacal, self-absorbed person who drove the state to expand, drove the army to be perfected, and drove his family too. And so it's really all starts with him. It all starts with Philip. He's Philip II of Macedon. And then the other person, of course, in our story tonight of Alexander, not just his father, but it's his mother, Olympias. Olympias, there's a image of her. There were many pictures of Olympias, so we know a lot about her. She was spectacularly beautiful, just spectacularly beautiful. So obviously he got some of his beauty from her, not from Philip. Philip wasn't very beautiful, but he was tough. And she came from Epirus, right here. That is present-day Albania. So not viewed as Greek like the rest of the Greeks, viewed as from a sort of a foreign land out on the edge. And her person, too, was sort of out on the edge. So she was a priestess in a number of cults that the Greeks didn't think were great cults, you see, because first of all, some of these cults had amazing practices late at night, throwing all kinds of stuff into the pot and having the smoke go up, and having unusual collections of animals around them. So, for example, Olympias had a whole zoo of snakes, which a lot of people felt was odd, to have snakes appear here and there every once in a while. She even had them in her bedroom. So when she and Philip go to bed the first time. The snakes slither into their bed together. Can you imagine what he thought of that? He thought that was a great idea. Oh yeah, sure. So there was a whole sort of aura of a sort of unusual nature to her. She was seen as sort of in touch with these darker spirits and darker sides. Now, we do know what she looked like, gorgeous. Her beauty was legendary. Her inspiration, her genius was celebrated. And, of course, these are the two parents. They were completely different. Philip was a tough guy, and Olympias was the sort of spiritual, poetic figure in the family. And they were married in 356. Here's a nice 17th century painting of the marriage. And in 356, very shortly afterward, was born one of the most important people in all of history, Alexander. This is a little charming ivory of the three of them together. And I love it because it's so perfect. I'm sure the sculptor didn't realize what a great insight he had into the family. But as you can see, Alexander's turning away from his parents. And the two of them look to be kind of locked in an abrasive of antipathy, which was exactly right. They had met in a religious celebration on one of the Greek islands, and he had been immediately attracted to her because she was so beautiful, and she was attracted to him because he was so powerful. He was a king. And so they just got married, and then they hated each other ever afterward. They just absolutely hated each other. And, of course, in the long run, the marriage was a big failure. And the result was, I think, harm to Alexander because he grew up in the family with the parents fighting. Now, we know a lot about Alexander because very near the capital of Old Macedon, in a place called Vergina, this great Greek archaeologist and classicist, Manolos Andronikos, found Philip's tomb in 1977. He had always felt that he knew where it was. This was in the 60s when he was encouraging excavations. He always felt he knew exactly where it was, and so kind of like the great 19th century classicists like Heinrich Schliemann, he encouraged the Greek government to sponsor the excavations, and in 1977 they had a huge breakthrough. This is the present-day museum that has been built on top of the excavations because some of it they wanted to keep exactly the way it was found. And so I'm just going to show you the royal tombs at Vergina. You can visit all of this. It's all available now to visitors from all over the world, and a lot of people go there. And included is Philip's tomb. Now, we're looking down at it from the way that Andronikos saw it when he first broke through the top, through the roof of the tomb, and then found the golden objects that are now on display in the museum. There's a huge debate that's been going on since 1977 whether this is really Philip's tomb or is it somebody else's. That always happens. You know, every time an archaeologist finds something really extraordinary, then the whole scholarly community has to get in on the act because, of course, he gets a lot of credit, and everybody starts celebrating Manolos Andronikos, and so all the other little guys want to nip at his heels, you know, and try and cut him down and say, no, that's not Philip. And so that's what they've been doing ever since 1977. If you want to look up the article on Vergina, it will give you the whole history of the excavations. I think it is Philip's tomb. This is the actual tomb in the museum. So as you saw at the door, you go down below ground and into what is the preservation of the actual tomb. And there you can see, this is the king of Greece being shown it once it was all complete, because that whole museum complex is relatively recent, maybe 10 years old or 12. And here's the drawing of what it looked like when they started to remove the stones at the top, because they were being very careful. They didn't want to touch it. They didn't want to harm it. But what they had found, of course, was a complete tomb, and then all these things inside of it, including, this is just a photograph looking right down into the tomb from the top. So it's all dirty. Everything's covered up. There's, you know, this is 2,000 years old, more than 2,000 years old. And But here's just some of the pots and pans that were found that now have been restored, taken out of the tomb, and they're in the museum so you can see them. But this is the most important thing of all, and this was the solid gold coffin for Philip's bones. So in that moment, they would burn the dead person. Then they would collect the bones in a very perfect ritual and then put the whole person into the golden coffin, and this is the golden coffin. There it is now, called the golden larynx of Philip II. That's on display in the museum. We're just looking right at it inside the museum. The museum, there's a lot to the museum. It has a lot of different things on display, but all of it comes from the tomb. So just looking at our pictures, you can see the wealth, unbelievable wealth that was part of Philip's state. He was very, very rich from money that people were paying him. If he conquered neighboring city-states, they would pay a huge tax to Philip. So his state had become enormously wealthy.